Two characters sit at a table in a bar. One, Andrew Neiman, is a freshman and jazz drummer at the prestigious Schaefer Conservatory in New York City, who hopes to leave behind a musical legacy far after he's gone, like his idol, jazz drummer Buddy Rich. The other, Terrence Fletcher, is the conductor of the Schaefer Conservatory studio band, who recruited Andrew as an alternate for the core drummer position. These two men debate whether or not immoral training methods are justified in an attempt to achieve greatness. Each character representing a different moral perspective on the subject of success in this scene, acting as the philosophical conflict of the film as a whole.
Start practicing harder, Neiman. Whiplash, bar 125, big boy tempo.
I told you that story about how Charlie Parker became Charlie Parker, right?
Yeah, Joe Jones threw a symbol at his head.
Exactly. But the next morning, what does he do? He practices with one goal in mind, never to be laughed at again. So imagine if Jones had just said, well, that's okay, Charlie. That was all right. Good job. There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
Fletcher expresses his belief that it is absolutely necessary to push people beyond what is expected of them. Otherwise, the world would be deprived of individuals like Charlie Parker, one of the most influential figures in jazz history. He believes that people like Parker only became who they were as a result of the excruciatingly strenuous training they experienced in combination with the constant grueling practice of their craft. Andrew briefly combats this viewpoint by asking,
But is there a line? You know, maybe you go too far and you discourage the next Charlie Parker from ever becoming Charlie Parker?
No, man, no. Because the next Charlie Parker would never be discouraged.
Yeah.
Consequently, Fletcher expresses his refusal to ever apologize for any of his manipulative and abusive training methods, as he claims to be merely doing his best to maximize talent and produce greatness.
But I tried. I actually fucking tried. I will never apologize for how I tried.
This type of a moral perspective relates to utilitarianism, an ethical theory focusing on the effects of a particular action in order to determine if said action is morally right or wrong. It is a theory of consequentialism, stating that the best action is one that maximizes utility, meaning pleasure and happiness, and minimizing pain and unhappiness. Take the trolley problem, a classic scenario I'm sure you've seen before. The question the problem asks is, do you pull the lever, redirecting the trolley to kill one person instead of 5, saving a net 4 lives? The answer, from a utilitarian standpoint, and the standpoint of most people, is undoubtedly yes, pull that lever, as making the choice to kill one person instead of 5 minimizes pain, unhappiness, and in this case, death. When examining Fletcher's scenario, his physical and psychological abuse of Andrew can be considered morally justified, as Andrew succeeds at the end of the film and is seemingly on his way to become someone like Charlie Parker. As a result, the joy Andrew will bring to the world through his music outweighs the individual pain he suffered, producing a net positive effect. When examining Andrew's scenario in a vacuum, assuming he goes on to maximize his skills and talents, there is seemingly merit to Fletcher's utilitarian perspective in justifying the potential destructive nature of his teachings. However, it is made clear in the bar scene that Fletcher has had many students who he treated harshly in the past. One crucial line of dialogue revealing,
The truth is, Andrew, I never really had a Charlie Parker.
This means that although his abuse quote-unquote worked for Andrew, it did not for his previous students. When taking this reality into account, Fletcher's justification becomes questionable. Does the pain and suffering of thousands of students outweigh the joy one single student might bring to the world? This potential flaw in Fletcher's perspective is manifested in another character of the film, who is only spoken about, Sean Casey. Casey was a student under Fletcher prior to Andrew, who Fletcher states to have
died yesterday in a car accident.
but we eventually discovered that he actually took his own life. It can be inferred that Fletcher lied about his death in order to protect himself, as he can be viewed as partly responsible. Therefore, he recognizes the flaw in his worldview and either ignores it entirely or believes it is a necessary evil in maximizing greatness. Casey taking his own life can be related to one of the objections to utilitarianism intellectualized by American political philosopher and professor Michael Sandel. This objection being that utilitarianism violates individual rights. For the utilitarian, individuals matter, but only in the sense that each person's preferences should be counted along with everyone else's. But this means that utilitarian logic, if consistently applied, can sanction ways of treating people that violate what we think of as fundamental norms of decency and respect. Sandel cites an example of ancient Rome, where Christians were thrown to the lions in the Colosseum to the amusement of a large crowd. This scenario technically satisfies utilitarian thinking because the greatest amount of pleasure was achieved as the few killings provided a collective enjoyment to far more spectators. But what of the Christians? They unjustly suffered excruciating pain and horrible deaths, yet it is deemed justified because of the collective utility produced? If the goal of utilitarianism is to maximize good for all, shouldn't the well-being of the individual be considered, as the individual is the building block for a healthy and prosperous society? The Sean Caseys of the world honestly don't steer far from the Christians in this scenario, as instructors like Fletcher are essentially throwing many of their students into bouts of severe depression and anxiety that they honestly may never recover from in an attempt to produce one individual who provides greatness to the world. Before discussing individual rights, it is worth noting that these types of situations, when examined outside of a vacuum, can sometimes be refuted by utilitarian thinking itself. When examining the ancient Rome scenario, it is entirely possible that the violent acts of entertainment, in the long run, would only breed more violence in the streets of Rome because of its continuous exposure, resulting in widespread desensitization. There could also be an increase in fear among the citizens of being tossed to lions. In Whiplash, Fletcher's severe instruction may lead to a significant decline of the city's mental health, considering he's taught thousands of students, as well as an increase in people taking their own lives. If these effects inflict enough harm, they may very likely outweigh the potential good produced by the success of a person like Andrew. In utilitarian theory, a baseline for moral importance regarding the individual is non-existent. This absence inevitably laid the groundwork for an opposing moral theory, Deontology. Deontology judges whether an action is right or wrong based on a clear set of rules that are agreed upon, examining the action itself rather than its potential consequences. This moral theory maintains an obligation against actions that are intrinsically wrong, such as physical and psychological abuse. Therefore, from a deontological perspective, Fletcher's actions are morally wrong and should be condemned, even when observing Andrew in a vacuum. Here's the same trolley problem from earlier, except with a twist this time, in order to highlight the ethics of an individual action. Instead of pulling a lever, a person must voluntarily push another large person down onto the tracks to hypothetically stop the trolley. It seems that most wouldn't think much of pulling a lever to save a net 4 lives. But ask yourself, honestly, would you physically push somebody onto the tracks? Another essential element of deontology relates to Sandel's second objection to utilitarianism, in which the theory attempts to calculate and aggregate happiness by translating all moral goods into a common currency of value. Deontology maintains that all values can never be measured on a single scale, and Sandel proposes a real-life example that highlights the dangers of doing so.
Meet the Pinto. Just born.
During the 1970s, the Ford Pinto was one of the best-selling cars in the United States. However, there was a potential life-threatening flaw with the vehicle. Its fuel tank was prone to explode on collision. An estimated range of 27 to 180 people died as a direct result of the faulty tanks. and it was discovered that the Ford engineers were actually aware of the faulty fuel tanks, yet never fixed the issue. Their reasoning came from a study conducted by the company executives, which concluded that the cost of fixing the tanks was not worth the extra $11 per car, because the cost of the lawsuits the company would receive would equal to less than the total cost of fixing the issue. If human life and economic benefit are reduced to the same value, then this decision can be justified from a utilitarian perspective. The issue is that directly equating human life with money would immediately lead to an unstable and dysfunctional society. It is also impractical and irrational to try to think from a moral perspective what a human life equates to in terms of economic profit. Therefore, it is impossible to come to any kind of consensus on what maximizing good is in these types of scenarios. Obviously, most would believe that this action is unquestionably morally wrong, as knowingly selling a product that may put buyers at risk of death violates the codes of ethics of business owners and society as a whole. When examining Whiplash, there is no practical method to equate the pain, suffering, and deaths of Fletcher's past students with the happiness derived from Andrew's future music. Also, similar to the Ford Pinto situation, enforcing training methods that have knowingly caused individuals to take their own lives in the past would be considered irresponsible and unethical by most. Consequently, the only consistent practice is to revert to the primary purpose of deontology, which is judging actions based on a moral code of ethics. The same idea can be applied to Andrew as an individual. Even if one agrees that the pain Andrew suffers throughout the film is worth it in the end, Andrew hypothetically taking his own life as a result of that pain is significantly less agreeable. Fletcher constantly speaks on Charlie Parker's greatness throughout the film. He conveniently fails to mention that he died of a heart attack at the young age of 34, as a result of heavy drug use stemming from mental health issues. He also tried to take his own life 2 times before his death by drinking iodine. Who is to say whether a lifetime of pain and suffering to the point of taking your own life is worth it because it may bring joy to others? This question is especially apparent considering the truth of Fletcher's goal, which, again, he explicitly states in the bar scene.
Never really had a Charlie Parker.
His motivations for his training methods are ultimately for selfish reasons, not for any purpose of maximizing good in the world.
His name was Sean Casey. Sean died yesterday.
Not my fucking tempo! You hear me, cocksuckers? You better start shitting me perfect 400s. Bullshit! Fuck you! Faster! 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 Keep playing! Keep playing! Keep playing!
He wants to be the man that taught the next Charlie Parker, period. From a certain point of view, that is no different than the Romans throwing Christians to the lions. Was it done for the collective joy of the spectators? Or did it primarily stem from a prejudice against Christians? You be the judge. While the utilitarian argument initially seems rational, it quickly falls apart when expanding beyond just the relationship between Andrew and Fletcher. And the argument also weakens when observed through a deontological moral framework. Although the film can be analyzed through both theories, director Damien Chazelle himself seems to also side with deontology as, if every single thing is enjoyable, then you're not pushing yourself hard enough. But this movie takes it to an extreme that I do not condone. Ultimately, the film allows us to question the relationship between morality and success in art and life as a whole, which is a discussion that people rarely value in contrast to the celebration of the achievements of their idols. The film, in its examination of morality, values the individual journey more so than the societal perception of success. When the film ends, we, the rest of society observing Andrew, have no idea whether or not he will be the next Charlie Parker, no idea whether the countless immoral actions and their physically and psychologically degrading effects will be worth it. In spite of that, we exit the film satisfied regardless of our moral beliefs, because in its final seconds, Andrew is satisfied and happy with himself. That is a feeling that many of us relate to, that all of us desire, which is why it often takes precedence over everything else.